Hey there, it's Tom Jordan. Got a great program today. Great to have you. I have two great guests. U.S. Senate candidate Mike Rogers will join me in a moment about a range of issues that we are going to discuss, followed by Emily Krol with Right to Life to respond to the misinformation from Tim Walz regarding the realities of abortion in his state and other states and these post-delivery or botched abortions where babies have survived. What happens to those babies in reality? But I really want to give an update right now on what's happening to half of the supply ports via ship in this country. Take a look at this. This port strike has been ongoing on the East and the Gulf Coast, and it is causing some serious disruptions for major companies like General Motors, Walmart, and LG Electronics as they struggle to get their goods into the United States. The strike is led by the International Longshoremen's Association, and it's halted trade at ports that account for about half of all U.S. imports, with shipping containers piling up. And analysts are starting to warn now that inflation could spike yet again, particularly affecting food and oil prices. And experts are also drawing some comparisons to the infamous Suez Canal crisis, as ships are now being forced to reroute, which is driving up shipping costs now by 20 to 50%. So General Motors topping the list of importers hit the hardest by the stoppage. GM, 62,600 containers are waiting to be processed. You got Walmart as well, the world's largest retailer, also facing substantial delays with 57,500 containers, while the business groups are calling on the Biden administration to step in and resolve the standoff. And so far, the White House has remained silent on this. They kind of want to let them figure it out themselves. But this silence, it really could cost the U.S. economy billions of dollars, with the daily losses estimated between $2.1 billion and $4.5 billion, depending on how long this strike lasts. And Mike Rogers is going to join me. He's going to talk a little bit about this. And he thinks if it resolves itself in about a week, maybe we will be okay. But keep in mind that they are asking these workers for an 80% pay raise, and they rejected a 50% pay raise. And Kamala Harris says, these companies need to do what's right and what's fair. So she's supporting that 80% pay raise demand. That'd be nice. I'm sure most of us would like something like that as well. All right, so U.S. Senate candidate, former chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers, will join me to talk about that and the cozy China relationship Tim Walz seems to have with the CCP and the reality of the national security threats against the United States. We'll talk about the escalating conflict between potentially with Israel. We'll hope to get into that, and these various Iranian terrorist proxies and the terrorist threats in the United States as a result of the Biden and Kamala Harris welcome mat that they have laid out to illegal immigrants from all over the world. And how, as he hopefully we'll talk about this too, how he as a senator is going to deal with all of these issues and more, regardless of who wins the presidency. But before we get to that, just a reminder to chime in, comment, ask questions in the comment sections, and I'll get to that in a moment. Comment sections of whether you're on Facebook or on X or you're on YouTube right now, chime in, and we'll bring those up in just a bit. Also, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live is simply to subscribe and click that little notification bell. That'll help us out quite a great deal. All right. There were a few things that need to be said about the debate the other night between Republican J.D. Vance and Democratic Socialist Tim Walz. First and foremost, these two, in my view, represent in very clear ways how each of their respective parties now represent their members of the parties. The difference between conservatism and socialism, essentially. And that is real, regardless of whether it's in the presidential race, a Senate race, a congressional House seat, all the way down to your local government races, maybe even your homeowners association. I'm not sure about that last one, but you see what I mean. You get into elected office and you start to fall in line with certain ideologies and holding on to power. Think about what J.D. Vance said versus Tim Walz, truth versus these disingenuous platitudes and slogans. So we've got a number of things here that we'll talk about. Vance's focus on peace through strength. J.D. Vance emphasized Donald Trump's foreign policy approach, arguing that Donald Trump's leadership established effective deterrence around the world. I mean, he stressed that under Donald Trump, the world was more stable because adversaries feared Donald Trump. They were afraid to step out of line because if they did, they knew there would be almost instantaneous and severe consequences. Tim Walz's shaky performance, he struggled from the start, stumbling through some of his answers, and instead of addressing a lot of these foreign policy questions that he really should have, because they're concerning to a lot of Americans, and they should have been more concerning to the moderators with CBS News. But instead of addressing them, he redirected attention to Donald Trump's performance in the previous debate, avoiding directly answering about a preemptive strike on Iran, and if you would support such a thing. Immigration was a hot button issue. The immigration debate highlighted a real stark contrast between J.D. Vance's focus on border security and Tim Walz's defense of the Biden-Harris administration's open border policies. And I talked to Democrats early on when the floodgates were open at the border, and they denied that it was occurring at that time. Said there's no crisis happening down there, just look the other way. And that was prior to the rest of the mainstream media finally picking up on the fact that, no, this is a serious crisis. And to this point, there have been millions of illegal immigrants coming across the border every year. That's unheard of. J.D. Vance criticized Kamala Harris as is ineffective, saying that he has visited the border more often than she has. Tim Walz denied that children were being trafficked and being used as drug mules. They are. The Iran nuclear deal dispute, Tim Walz attacked Donald Trump for withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, which was the right thing to do, by the way, because they were building these weapons anyway without consequence. So Tim Walz claimed it pushed Iran closer to nuclear capabilities. That wasn't true. They're on their way anyways, and you were ignoring it. J.D. Vance fired back, reminding Tim Walz that Harris has been in office for nearly 4 years, yet has failed to secure that region, instead making it far less secure by helping to fund Iran's terrorist activities by giving them new access to tens of billions of dollars. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris also take this approach of weakness, not wanting to strike Iran for fear that they might attack back, while experienced generals that I've even spoken to, they argued that Iran needs to be held accountable for their incessant targeting of Jews, of Israelis, and American forces in that region as well. And then there's the abortion debate, which we will get into with Right to Life later in this program, the pro-family policies. J.D. Vance made a compelling case for a broader definition of pro-family policies, pushing for support in fertility treatments, IVF. Yeah, the Republicans support that. Affordable housing, that's a family issue. It's a pro-life issue, creating options for young families. And he contrasted this approach with Tim Walz's unyielding support for abortion rights and called out Tim Walz's allowance of abortion for all 9 months of pregnancy and lifting restrictions in Minnesota that had required doctors to report that any baby born alive after a botched abortion should be made aware that occurred. They're denying it. There's no more requirement in Minnesota to do that. And babies it's true, they are now being left to die if they are born alive and survive an abortion. He dodged his Tiananmen Square claim. He found himself on the defensive when asked about his claim to have been present during the Tiananmen Square protests. He wasn't. He was visibly nervous explanation. He admitted that he had misspoken, and he arrived later that year. Not necessarily a big deal in and of itself, but the constant, misspeaking by this guy. Maybe we should call it what it is. These are lies that are coming out. This is disinformation that Tim Walz has been spewing for a long time. There's gun control, there's school safety. J.D. Vance pointed out the practical measures to keep kids safe, strengthening doors in schools and windows, and increasing the school resource officers as solutions to gun violence. Tim Walz pushed for what he calls reasonable gun control measures, like going into people's houses and taking their guns, search and seizure. uh, supposedly wouldn't infringe on Second Amendment rights. Well, they would. And the threat to democracy debate, there's all of these things that I think J.D. Vance made it very abundantly clear, even to many Democrats, that he is the best choice for vice president of the United States. I want to talk about a lot of issues here. Mike Rogers, Republican candidate for U.S. Senate in Michigan and the former chair of the House Intelligence Committee. Mike joined me just a few minutes ago prior to the start of this program, and here's our conversation. Mike Rogers is a Republican candidate for U.S. Senate and, of course, the former chair of the House Intelligence Committee, and not to mention his many years in the U.S. Army and as an agent with the FBI. Mike Rogers, good to have you back. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Tom, it is great to see you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you got it. So I want to ask you real quick before we get into some other topics, including what's happening with China and their infiltration into this country. But we've got this impact of this dock workers strike that is happening right now on the East Coast and the Gulf Coast as well. And they're demanding, I believe, an 80% wage increase, these strike workers. And of course, we all want them to succeed. But they rejected a 50% wage increase the night before the strike. So now we have these ports on the East Coast and on the Gulf Coasts shut down as they try to work out in a deal. So in the meantime, in your view, does this mean that we're going to see some higher prices, whether it's in the automobile industry, trying to buy a car? Are we going back to what it was like 3 years ago with this rapid increase in prices, do you think?
I think there's a little bit of cushion built in, Tom, but not long. I think if this goes longer than a week, you're going to see prices go up pretty quickly, actually. So, I mean, listen, I know the Biden administration says they don't want to get involved. When you look at where the economy is, where you look at people's personal economy, it's pretty rough. And having any more stress added to that is not going to be helpful. So I listen. I hope they work this out. I hope they get this done. And I hope they get it done soon because it's going to cost people more money than they've. I think of this: we've just exceeded $1 trillion in collective credit card debt, which
Hmm.
is the first time in history. Which means people are buying groceries at 23% interest. This is not sustainable. Adding this to that heap is not great.
No, and you think about the companies that are impacted by it. We got General Motors, we got Walmart, I think LG. These are the top importers that are being impacted right now as a result of that. And we happen to buy a lot of the products from those companies. So, but I want to ask you this too, and then we'll move on. But Costco, not the retailer, but the shipping company, that's the largest, I believe, shipping company at these ports. They happen to be Chinese owned. They're under the thumb. They're controlled by the state. The Communist Party of China is what this company is. The largest in these ports. And we see all those shipping containers that say Costco on the side of it. That's China. Is that just one more indication of how dependent we are on this communist country in your view?
Oh, absolutely. Remember, there was this big shift. People thought it was the gold rush to rush into China. All these corporate leaders thought, hey, China is where all the money's going to be made. It's a billion people in the market. You know, they had lots of reasons to be there. So yes, and you look at our supply chains. Look at over 80% of our medicine is made in China. Yeah, 85% of critical minerals that go into things like electric vehicles have to go through China. Yeah, this is a huge problem. Supply chain is a huge problem. And I hope this is the time that we start having the hard conversations about how we friendshore, we reshore these products. This is an opportunity for states that build things like Michigan to get back to building things again, which would be fantastic.
Well, I think this is why Donald Trump wants to put in these tariffs against China because of exactly what's happening right now. We are so dependent economically on the Chinese Communist Party, and he's like, it's just not fair. They get a bargain, they come here, they infiltrate our ports and whatnot. But speaking of infiltration, you look around at various campuses. I know the University of Michigan and whatnot. You find out that there are a lot of spies amongst us from China, as we've seen as of late that these Chinese spies have been arrested. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so every 12 hours, the FBI opens up a Chinese espionage case. That's higher rate than at any time during the Cold War with the Soviet Union. They are prolific at this. They are unending and they will not stop. And why this one was important is because they were arrested around Camp Grayling. And what happens at Camp Grayling in Michigan is, well, we also train Taiwanese forces how to defend themselves from the Communist Party of China through these training rotations. And why that's even more important is there's the battery, the Goshen plant that has much controversy in the state, as it should. The taxpayers gave it $175 million in cash and prizes to locate here. To By the way, to kill Michigan jobs,
Hmm.
and it's only about 60 miles away. We've been saying for a long time, those of us who understand China and understand Chinese espionage, they will use that location to spy on Camp Grayling. Well, here's the perfect example. They were using students from Ann Arbor trained to go up and try to find out what was going on during a large training exercise there. Chinese espionage is here. The Chinese Communist Party is here. They want to take our legs out from under us. We ought to act accordingly as we move forward.
To that point, your competitor, Alyssa Slotkin, she signed this non disclosure agreement that basically she has all the access to information regarding that Chinese plant, Goshen, in Michigan. And seeing that they are such a direct threat to the security of this country and the state, not to mention the jobs that they'll be taking and whatnot, and the environment and all those issues, but really the national security. Does she, in your view, I've never asked this question before, but I know she signed a non disclosure agreement. But seeing that she is a representative in the halls of Congress representing her constituents, does she have an obligation, do you believe, to maybe break that non disclosure agreement and reveal to her constituents and to this country what really is in that deal?
Absolutely, but not just that. They need to disclose all the materials around that NDA. We should all understand why our taxpayer money was given to a company that is now found to be tied to the Communist Party of China. And now there's allegations of bribery paid by the company to local officials and others in the area. And by the way, this is exactly how China does it around the world. No one is surprised in the national security space how they do this. And so these are new, fresh allegations that there was bribery paid. And the reason they have to have this battery plant and bring a Chinese company with Chinese engineers to America is because of the EV mandates, right? They're going
Mm-hmm.
well ahead of the marketplace. And
Mm-hmm.
so they have to try to find these ways, and they're willing to give a Chinese company our money and, by the way, our jobs in the long run. None of this makes sense. So yes, you should disclose it. Yes, you should not only break the NDA but provide all the materials. She should call on the MEDC to release all of the materials related to this plant, all of the discussions, all of the emails, all of the text on this. We need to understand. I mean, think about how complicated secret deals, now allegations of bribes. We have Chinese espionage at Camp Grayling, which is would be certainly all a part of operations there for the Communist Party of China if they had Chinese engineers there. This is a mess. The other thing is they should suspend the money for the project today.
Yes.
They should stop the money flowing to this project. They should close this thing up and call it a win for America and Michigan when they do.
Well, let's just say today, this is a call for Alyssa Slotkin and, by extension, Governor Gretchen Whitmer to reveal what's in it, break the non disclosure agreement for the sake of the citizens of this country and the citizens of this state, and reveal what's in this non disclosure and what this company, Goshen, owned by China and controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, break the NDA and reveal what's really in there and turn your back on them. That would be a great thing for them to do. We'll see what that happens. And speaking of the China threat, Tim Walz, the current Democratic candidate for vice president of the United States, he seems to really love China and has met on a number of occasions with members of the Chinese Communist Party. You would have thought, I would have thought at least, that would have been brought up at the vice presidential debate Tuesday night, but it was not. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, listen, he's clearly going to be in a China appeasement person. I think the whole Democrat regime so far has shown us that they will appease China at our expense. And I think we're going to have to flip this around. This is why elections have consequences. This is why this election is so important. You've got to get Donald Trump in to kind of nip this in the bud, number one. And you've got to take the United States Senate so we can stop the things that they've been doing, like promoting these EV mandates. By the way, 5,000 American auto dealers wrote an open letter to the President of the United States saying this is killing, the EV mandates are killing us. Please do something about it, like stop them. And 2 weeks ago, my opponent just voted again for EV mandates. She had a chance to stand up and stop the regulatory way that they get at these mandates, and she didn't do it. And so they're off on that trail. I don't care what they say. They are political cicadas. They come out in election year and say, "I'm for you. I'm not for EV mandates. I'm for a secure border." And then the election's over, and guess what? They crawl back in their hole, and they're doing the same darn thing over and over again.
It's too bad that, I mean, they come out more frequently than the real cicadas. I think the cicadas come out like 18
Right.
years. This is every 4 years, these political cicadas that come out. That's a great phrase. By the way, the electric vehicles, we're seeing what's happening with Hurricane Helene when it came through. When salt water mixes with these EVs, they explode. And that's happening right now down in these states where this massive flooding is occurring and gathering around these electric vehicles. It's not, these lithium batteries are not safe. It's not safe for people to drive them. I want to talk about healthcare because we see Democrats, including your opponent in the Senate race, Alyssa Slotkin, continue to say how great Obamacare is and like opposing it is somehow a bad thing. Yet, the warning has always been, at least in my view, that Obamacare is like the very first step to universal health care, single payer health care, government mandated Medicare for all. And sure enough, that's what Alyssa Slotkin and the Democrats are all on board with. So Slotkin co sponsors the Medicare for All plan, which, experts say would force rural hospitals to close in the state of Michigan. We're talking dozens of hospitals would be forced to close based on this plan that Alyssa Slotkin, your opponent in the Senate race, has co-sponsored. Is that for real, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is a nightmare for the providers of service and healthcare and hospitals that are already, some are kind of on a fragile economy. They stay open through a whole host of reasons. This puts kind of the stake in their heart on keeping these rural hospitals open. And remember when the promises were, hey, listen, this you can keep your doctor if you want to. Nope, that proved not to be true in this. Oh, the rates it'll only cost you, less than $2,500. We all know that's not true. And the premiums just keep going up. Matter of fact, Medicare Part D premiums have doubled under
Hmm.
Alyssa Slotkin since she's been in Congress. She doesn't seem to be too worried about that, and it's going to get worse. They're just coming at it all wrong. I don't think their intentions are bad, but their operation to get there is a disaster. And running around saying, thumping their chest, saying, "See, we're helping you." In the meantime, hospitals are closing. The pressure on hospitals. Look at Ascension Hospital in Detroit had to go on strike just to try to make sure that they could stay open in their emergency room 24 hours. I mean, all of these problems are coming because they allow the government too much into this space, and it is causing huge problems.
Yeah, and to the point of the rising premiums, I asked Alyssa Slotkin in 2018 when she was running against Mike Rogers in your former seat after you retired. Of course, Mike Rogers
Mike
took that
Mike
seat.
Bishop.
I'm
Oh,
sorry,
Mike Bishop.
Mike. You're Mike. Mike Bishop. I always do that. Mike Bishop, Mike and Mike. But great guy. And she lied about the premiums at the time, saying that listen, I acknowledge that the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, the premiums are too high, but I'm going to bring them down. This done just the opposite since then. And I know that you support protecting Medicare, and it's not addressed, I don't think, frequently enough, Medicare and Social Security. But what is the reality? How can you protect Medicare in your view? Protect Medicare, which is very important, but at the same time allowing options for people that don't need to go on government-assisted health care, and keep that private option open.
Yeah, well, one of the things that the Democrats just did when they passed all of that $6 trillion in spending, one of the plans was they moved about $300 million out of Medicare to give to, I don't know, Chinese companies like Goshen, I guess. And it cost $300 million. And that was for that private Medicare Advantage option for people so that they could participate and get the health care that's good for them and their family. And so I think what you have to do is you have to have some of the pressures of the private market efficiency in Medicare. None of that is there. And right now, the Biden administration is stacking up money on huge premium increases. And the reason they're doing it, it's not sustainable. They know they can't do it forever. They're doing it in an election year because when after the election happens, you're going to see huge spikes in these premiums. We have got to get more free market efficiencies back into Medicare so that you get better care and it's more affordable. And that's just not happening. And the longer they're playing this shell game, I mean, they're subsidizing now the subsidies in prescription drugs. That is just the most unsustainable thing. And what I think Democrats really want to do here, Tom, to your point, is they want to make sure that this system fails. Because if it fails, they say, see, it's too hard, it's too complicated. The only way we're going to get this done is by government-run healthcare. Medicare for all is basically government-run healthcare. The problem is the math doesn't work. And when you have a president that's out there, saying, hey, I think there should be no private insurance, right? Think of the UAW workers who negotiated pretty hard their whole careers for getting good health care. That goes away. Now everybody gets the same thing. I don't think this is what people in America want or bargain for, and it will result in less quality care, and it will be more expensive to the government. It just doesn't work. We've shown it over and over. It doesn't work.
You just touched on something that I think is really the strategy with pretty much anything, is causing certain things that have worked for, decades and centuries to fail so they can, quote, build back better. That's their kind of, I think, design here. And you can apply that to healthcare and Medicare and private insurance, but you could also apply it to things like national security. You can look at the border. They want our immigration system, our border security to fail to such a degree, in my opinion, that we have no option. There's millions of people here now. Let's just grant them U.S. citizenship. And I think that Build Back Better, that's essentially what that means. This is a World Economic Forum plan to do that. Destroy the landscape and then build back better in the way that we see fit to do so, which means, government run. It's socialism, even, dare I say, communism. So you look at the border, and that you've got 425,000 convicted criminals that are currently not detained, who are wandering freely within this country. And we are at risk of them not only, committing additional crimes, and the crime rate is going up, rents are going up, the cost of housing is going up, the cost of everything, and they're part of the reason why. And J.D. Vance, I think, did a good job of pointing that out during that debate and, contradicting the moderators on that as well. And he did a great job at that. But we talk about these people in this country. Do you think that is by design when we have not just the, maybe tens of millions of illegal immigrants in this country now who are in line to get maybe U.S. citizenship, but the fact that there are these criminals who we know they're criminals are allowed to roam freely within this country? Why is that, do you think, this administration thinks important for them to do?
I think their goal here was to tear down the border. There are people in the Democrat Party who believe in open borders. You should be able to come here if you can get here, which is really dangerous. I think that they just believe that this criminal element is just an accepted consequence of their policies, and we'll get over that. They don't understand what happens in a victim's life. I've been a law enforcement officer. I understand what happens when you are the victim of a crime. Your finances are screwed up, your emotional well-being is screwed up, maybe forever, and you can have physical damage as well. They don't seem to care about the victims. If you think about their whole policy, softer on crime, people should, the victims aren't victims, the criminals are the victims. And so when you start thinking about why that is dangerous to our society around the country, again, it's self-evident to people who get up and play by the rules and go to work and put your kids on the bus every day. It is not to that Washington elite core back there that says, hey, open borders are somehow good for us. And well, let's flood the zone. And by the way, that means more people on government services. More people have to get a government check. For those of us who have been in government our whole life, I'm talking about Democrats in Washington, D.C., this is a good thing. Right, that means I'll be in power for the rest of my life. I just think they just have a skewed, view of the world that is very government centric, and I think that's how you make these bad mistakes, and you overlook people who are working for a living.
You think, I know this is a final question here, but this is, I think, a very, very consequential election. Do you think if this election does not go in the favor of, conservatives, generally speaking, do you think in 4 years from now, maybe we may be too far gone and too far down that path?
I worry what they can do in another 4 years, and it's because there's no stop. There's no right now. They've got internal momentum. They're just issuing new regulations. Matter of fact, they just issued something the other day where 30 million small businesses are going to have to report not only their business finances but their personal finances through something called the FinCEN back. I mean, if you think about how intrusive that is, hard to start unwrapping this stuff if we don't change now. We can get that changed if we get elected in November and Donald Trump is president and we have a Republican Senate. Hopefully, keep the Republican House, makes it a lot easier to do it there to stop this nonsense. If not, it all gets embedded in. It all gets worse. There are other regulations on its way to take away our freedom. I don't even know how it's constitutional to basically say you have to give me your personal finances because you're a small business owner. I don't even understand where that kind of attitude comes from, but it's
No.
coming. $1.6 trillion in new regulatory costs just in the last 4 years. And what has that done? It means this is the first time we've imported more food than we've exported, built more foreign cars in America than domestic cars. This is the first time our credit card debt's over $1 trillion, and the first time our interest payment on our national debt is bigger than Department of Defense. How can we take another 4 years of that?
Intrusiveness and control, I think two words that these political cicadas really appreciate and prioritize. It's always good to talk to you. Mike Rogers, candidate for U.S. Senate in the great state of Michigan. Mike, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Tom, it's always great to see you. Thanks for having me.
All right, have a good one. And go to Mike Rogers. It's Mike Rogers. What is it? What's your website? Rogers for Senate?
RogersForSenate.com.
RogersForSenate.com. Mike Rogers, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Hey, we need all the help we can. George Soros and Hollywood pouring money in here. Get on
You got
board.
that
Let's
right.
do it. We can win.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I
Tom.
agree. I think you can. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks.
Yeah. Good conversation. Mike Rogers, thanks for joining us. One thing we didn't get a chance to talk about, we're going to talk about now, though, is why do Democrats really themselves refuse to talk about what they really believe about abortion, that it's not really health care, but it's an option to try and make life more convenient, a form of birth control, to get rid of the baby that is going to make their lives incredibly difficult, more selfless, and potentially be, in their minds, a hindrance to upward career mobility. Because that's what sounds bad if they said that out loud, so they don't do it. And that's exactly what it is, though. It is bad. It's dark. It's, don't shine a light on it. Instead, keep it hidden under the guise of compassion and women's rights and health care. And most demonstrably, dishonest. Somehow these are reproductive rights, when in fact abortion is just the opposite. Obviously. So Tim Walz responded to J.D. Vance's question about why he allows babies who survive abortions to die on the table and for doctors to now be required to not be required to give life-saving care. And here's how Tim Walz responded.
As I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business.
Pretty sick, mind your own business and let us do whatever we want. The experts, the doctor, if the doctor chooses the right thing to do is to let that baby die, so be it. That's the expert. So long as the doctor and the women say so. The fact of the matter is babies are surviving abortions and the doctors are deciding to leave that baby to die. to leave a live baby to die. You know, this whole mind your own business attitude exists and permeates the Democratic Party. And it reminds me when a member of Congress flat out told me on the air, when I asked her if she believes or does not believe there is a baby inside the womb, and Congresswoman Haley Stevens told me I have no right to ever ask such a question because I'm a man. You know, mind your own business is what she said as well, just like Tim Walz just said. To which I reminded her that, you know, children are my business as well. As a father of both girls and boys, it's not just a women's issue. And furthermore, she, as a member of Congress, in one statement violated the Constitution, which she had taken an oath to protect and defend. She violated my rights to free speech, and she was discriminatory based on my gender as a man. And they all do this. And to me, that's a disqualification of her office. But to the larger point here, you know, babies are being left to die with growing acceptance in this country. And yet Tim Walz lies about it, said it's not really happening. It is happening, and it is a direct result of the law that he signed in 2023. And I want to talk about this with the Right to Life of Michigan's Emily Krol. She is the PAC director for Right to Life of Michigan. Emily, I can't thank you enough for your time and for joining me on the program. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
You know, I don't, you know, I know you're in Michigan, but Minnesota is just one of many states who is going this route. Michigan is also going this route as well, kind of putting some ambiguous language into these laws and these proposals. I know Michigan had Proposal 3, which, you know, effectively does the same thing that Minnesota does. But the Minnesota Department of Health report showing that at least, you know, several babies have been born, have survived these botched abortions in that state, and they were allowed to die essentially on the table. The doctor did not provide medical care to keep that baby alive. So you saw Tim Walz's reaction there. Is he just being disingenuous? Is he lying? And what is really happening in states like Minnesota?
Well, Minnesota and now here in Michigan, as well as a result of the Reproductive Health Act of 2023. So essentially, let's define what procedure we're actually talking about with a late-term abortion here. Most people will think this is a dismemberment abortion where the baby's limbs are ripped off in the womb. Those typically happen before the point of viability because the baby's bones have not yet hardened. So the particular procedure we're talking about, where these born alive laws that have been proposed and Kamala Harris voted against in the U.S. Senate, is a baby who survived a late-term induction abortion. So when this occurs, the baby is injected with a medication to cause fetal cardiac arrest. And some abortionists will use an ultrasound to then determine if the baby's heart has stopped and the baby has died, but it's not required. And then the baby is delivered. So they induce labor after dilating the women and deliver a baby whole. Some infants, the heart doesn't stop. They don't do the ultrasound to check to make sure that the heart has stopped, and they're delivered live after the point of viability, which is right around 22 to 24 weeks. We had a study from the University of Portland a few years ago that said 60% of babies who are born at 22 weeks can survive if given medical care. So we're not talking about situations where the baby has survived the horrific experience of a dismemberment abortion and they're dying slowly without their limbs. That does happen as well. It's more rare. We're talking about babies who actually have a good chance of being able to live whole, healthy lives after surviving this experience. And laws like in Minnesota say that what Governor Ralph Northam of Virginia said very famously a few years ago, that the decision will be made as the baby is set aside between the mother and the parent and the doctor, whether we give this baby medical care or not. And for someone who values human life, that really is horrific. You have a living, breathing baby outside of the womb, and you're deciding whether or not you're going to preserve that life.
You have, when Donald Trump made that claim, you mentioned Ralph Northam, the former governor of Virginia, talking about this should be an option that's up to the doctor and the mother. It's a very private discussion whether or not to save the baby after the baby is sitting there on the table surviving an abortion, and bring that baby to term, and deliver the baby, and then decide what to do with it. That is something that Ralph Northam did say. He did say that very publicly, but CNN came out and fact-checked it and said, no, that's not really true. And even during the ABC News debate, Lindsay Davis said, nowhere in this country, any state, is that really happening. And so you have those quote-unquote experts refuting these claims from Donald Trump and from Right to Life of Michigan that these things are in fact occurring. And I know they are because I've talked to enough people to. So what do you make of all this? I mean, what happens? How do you get the word out to the American people, the extreme positions that Democrats are really taking, and yet we're being kind of gaslit into believing they're not that extreme? How do you? I know you're in a tough position to do that with the Right to Life, but it's incumbent. I know you feel it's a responsibility to make sure you're telling the truth. How difficult is that truth to get out there when you have so many forces opposing you?
Well, so many forces opposing us. We've all seen over the last year now that the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris and the Michigan legislature and Governor Whitmer have made abortion their number one issue in this election. And they're out there gaslighting people with the fantasy that abortion is at risk in the state of Michigan. And we all know that's not true because of the passage of Proposal 3 in 2022. The truth is, even though pro-life people aren't happy with it, a woman in Michigan can get an abortion for any reason at any point in her pregnancy, and the Reproductive Health Act of 2023 legalized partial birth abortion in the state of Michigan. So their position, just by the facts, is completely contrary to what they're trying to tell voters. You've probably seen the advertisements that they're running here in the state of Michigan saying that pro-life candidates want to put women in jail for having abortions, when the truth is a woman in Michigan's entire history, even when abortion was illegal, has never been jailed, not a single time, for having an abortion. And the Michigan Supreme Court, before Proposal 3, before Roe v. Wade, in a case called Henry Vickers, stated that a woman cannot be prosecuted for having an abortion. And so they're trying to scare voters. It's all they're doing. They're trying to drive them to the polls from a fear vote with a fantasy, because it's the only thing they have to run on. And we've seen Kamala Harris in the state several times with her I Love Abortion bus tour. We saw that at the nominating convention in Chicago for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. They had a free abortion mobile clinic outside the building. And that's an incredibly extreme position. And here in Michigan, we know Governor Whitmer said it on the radio. It was part of the original reproductive health package that they want to remove parental consent for a minor girl having an abortion. They want to remove protections for taxpayers who don't want to pay for abortions. And so what we're doing here at Right to Life of Michigan, and what the pro-life movement as a whole is doing in Michigan, is reiterating the fact to voters: look, abortion's legal, but these are the issues at stake. Common sense protections for parents' rights, for the conscience rights of taxpayers, because they are radical. The Kamala Harris, the pro-abortion politicians in Lansing are radicals who want to force everyone to participate in unregulated abortion, which actually removes the rights of women, children, and families.
It's incredibly extreme. And to that point, I mean, I did ask Governor Gretchen Whitmer in 2022, prior to Proposal 3 passing that constitutional amendment that would allow all these new laws to go into effect, these extreme laws regarding abortion. But I asked her, I said, listen, there's a lot of people saying that Proposal 3, which you support, is going to allow, the stripping away of parental rights. It's going to allow minors to get abortions. It's going to allow for all 9 months of pregnancy. It's going to allow, maybe partial birth abortions, and stripping away of all the protections in these health clinics and the safety standards. And she said to me, that is disinformation, all of that is a lie. Sure enough, it passes based on that disinformation that Governor Whitmer shared with the people in her state. She was lying about it. As soon as it passed, of course, she and the Democrats passed all these laws and put them up for vote, which did exactly all of those things that they denied were going to occur based on this constitutional amendment. And so let's talk, I guess, a few of those things, because I know we talk about Minnesota just because Tim Walz is there, but Minnesota is just one of many states. Michigan has now gone so far left on this position and is so extreme and dangerous for women because of some of these. Let's bring up the safety standards for one. My understanding, the way the new laws are going to work, is that the facilities, these surgical facilities, no longer have to be inspected by the state to make sure they're sanitary. What is necessary for a procedure of this nature, a serious procedure? What is the reality behind that? I'm on track here in terms of that law?
You're right on point. So as part of the Reproductive Health Act last year, they removed health and safety standards and clinic licensing and regulations for facilities that do a high number of abortions. So basically your Planned Parenthoods, your Northland Family Clinics, and things like that. Hospitals that perform abortions still fall under other regulations. So these are your standalone abortion facilities. And those regulations, which the abortion lobby said were unnecessary burdens that hindered a woman's access to abortion, were simple things like making sure a hallway is wide enough for a gurney to fit through if there is a problem, having licensed medical staff, safe storage of medication, the waste disposal for needles and things like that. But it's actually gone a step further than what we saw in the Reproductive Health Act, because a judge put an injunction against Michigan's informed consent law, and part of that law is a physician requirement so that the people performing the abortion procedures have to be licensed physicians. Because of the combination of the Reproductive Health Act and the judge's injunction, we now have non-physicians in the state of Michigan who are fully authorized to perform surgical abortions.
Wow.
And
So that could be anybody.
Yeah, as a result of that, we saw in the last abortion report, which will be the final abortion report because they removed the requirement to report those, we had serious complications from an abortion in the state of Michigan rise 38% last year. Those are women who are being seriously harmed by a radical policy position in an unregulated industry, and that unfortunately will continue until the people of Michigan say it's enough.
Wait, okay, so say that again, or maybe expand on that issue. So you're saying that the state of Michigan no longer has to report, they're no longer required to report when there's a serious complication during an abortion procedure.
Yeah, so Michigan previously had a law on the books that required basic reporting for abortions. So how many abortions, what was the procedure, basic information about the woman. So how old was she, where is she from? And as part of that law, reporting complications from the procedure. That law was repealed in the Reproductive Health Act, which is the same act that got rid of the licensing and regulations. So not only do we have no safety measures for women, we have no way to know if women are harmed in the procedure. So this last year was the last year that the abortion reporting law was in effect. And the only reason we know that serious complications rose by 38% is from that report. And that's information we will not have in the future.
Well, so if a woman is injured during an abortion procedure, does she have any recourse, any legal recourse, or is she just kind of left on her own?
That's a good question. It's kind of up in limbo for right now. We've seen in the past that there is no recourse for women. We had, I forgot what her name was, unfortunately, and I should remember this. We had a young woman in Kalamazoo within the last 15 years who was killed as a result of the abortion pill usage. Her family sought recourse for that and were denied in the court of law. We have seen it in states like Arizona, We've had women who have perished in abortion procedures, and there's settlements outside of the law. In that case, there was some interesting illicit drug use and prescribing of fentanyl for the procedure that was going on there in Arizona. So, but here in Michigan, at this point, it's all up in the air, and we don't know because we're in this new wild, wild west of abortion policy.
Yeah, in the meantime, we're making the procedure more dangerous because we're removing safety standards. I want to get you this, two more questions. This one, what do you think, from your experience, Emily, is the real reason why there's so much support for abortion? Is it to protect a woman's health, or is it something different than that?
I think it's a combination of factors. The first factor being that abortion was legal for 50 years. And when you make something available, people are going to use it. And so it became a part of the culture. Generations were raised believing that the baby in the womb is just a clump of cells. And the education support system supported that. It was supported by 50% of the politicians. And it really became a part of the culture. And so for the long run, if we want to protect human life in the womb, we have to change the culture. Politically speaking, though, I believe the reason that abortion is such a big deal is one, well, right now, the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris have nothing else to run on. They can't run on economy. They've done a terrible job. They can't run on foreign policy. They've done a terrible job. They can't run on immigration. They've done a terrible job. And everyone knows this. The only thing they have is scaring women to the polls with this fantasy belief that their rights are going to be infringed. And it's just not the case. So we've got this interesting dichotomy of where the culture has gone, the political powers, and just to remind people, abortion is a multi-billion-dollar industry in the United States, and it is very hard to make change when there's that much money backing something up.
Yeah, there you go. There's price gouging happening in real time, and there's something that Kamala Harris and all these Governor Gretchen Whitmer, all of them support this. It is a ruse out there, and there's the vast majority, I think, in my opinion, the reason why people are supporting abortion because it makes their lives more convenient. And so it's a sad thing. I think people really need to support Right to Life of Michigan. I'll be speaking at an event in this month at the Yacht Club in Grosse Pointe. It's a fundraiser for Right to Life, but we want to get as many people supporting your organization as possible because there's a lot of work to be done, and you're on the front lines of this. And I just wish you all the best. Emily Krol is the PAC director for Right to Life of Michigan. Emily, it's really good to talk to you. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
You as well.
Thank you so much. All right. So we want to take some of your comments here. We've had a couple of very interesting conversations. Cameron's watching the comments this morning on our various platforms, on YouTube, on Facebook, on X. Cameron, what do we got? There we go. Joe Spalding, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are gun owners. Yes, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz own guns, Joe, but how long have they owned these guns? Don't know for sure, but I can tell you this. Both of those people, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, want to take away your guns at any time they deem necessary. They both made that abundantly clear. They're not Second Amendment supporters at all. Both of them have said such. Kamala Harris even has said herself, she thinks it's absolutely okay for the government to go inside your home, even if you're a responsible gun owner, to go inside your house to make sure you're really being responsible. And if they don't think you are, to take your guns away. She's also supported Joe Spalding. And you know this. You know this is true. And you don't support guns either. So you probably do not like the fact that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz say that they actually are gun owners. But I can tell you this, that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz both support mandated buyback programs, meaning that if you have a gun, you will be mandated to return it back to the government. Yeah, they'll pay you some money for it, but it is an obligation. And if you don't do it, there will be legal consequences. So this whole I'm a gun owner thing, it's not flying with anybody. We know full well where they truly stand on the Second Amendment. Joe Spalding always being disingenuous, but appreciate your comment there. Thanks so much. What else we got there, Cameron? All right, Dustin Harris. I hope Mike becomes the leader we need. Mike Rogers, he's speaking of, and genuinely follows, I think is trying through on his commitment to clean out the FBI and other promises that he has made. Did not vote for him in the primary, as I told him I would not, but will fully support him in the general. I just hope he represents all of us and had stark opposition to them in the primary and understand what we need from him as a representative. Dustin, I understand what you're saying here. Listen, Mike Rogers is the real deal. He's a conservative. And I know he's gotten a little pushback because of some of his, previous concerns about Donald Trump. But a lot of Republicans did have concerns about Trump. And I initially did as well. But I supported Donald Trump in 2016 because I found out quickly who he was in terms of policy and conservatism. But there's reason to be concerned about, his kind of undisciplined rhetoric and whatnot. And I think part of that is part of Donald Trump's strategy, but he is a fighter. And just like J.D. Vance, I think Mike Rogers came around to see, okay, Donald Trump is somebody who has turned around our economy. He has made this country much safer. And Mike Rogers fully supports Donald Trump. And I do believe, as I've gotten to know Mike Rogers over the years, that he is going to follow through at all of these things he's talking about. Especially in his you mentioned the FBI. He is, I won't use the word distraught, but very concerned about what has happened to the leadership and the direction of the FBI since he left that agency many years ago. It was a different agency back then. But he says it's like 10 layers deep, the Department of Justice right now, of all these far-left liberal attorneys protecting their domain. So, yeah, he knows what's going on there. I do believe he will follow through and try to weed that place out and pull out the briars and the thistles and make it a respectable agency again. Dustin, it's always good to hear from you. What else we got there? Arlene, JD asserts Minnesota abortion statutes wording. Walz disagrees. No actual fact check done by mainstream media. No, you're right. Arlene, and it's good to hear from you, Arlene. You're absolutely right. The mainstream media, actually, they support. If you notice during the debate, when you had Margaret Brennan there and Norah O'Donnell, when J.D. Vance was making all these claims about the Minnesota law that does now allow for doctors to leave babies to die after they survive these abortions, do not give them medical care. They do not have to. And that is a law that Tim Walz signed in 2023. You no longer have to protect, and they weren't doing it before either, where there were no consequences, but this now makes it official. If you noticed Margaret Brennan and Norah O'Donnell, what they said to, after J.D. Vance said those things, they looked at Tim Walz and said, yes, Governor, please respond to J.D. Vance's accusations. The fact of the matter is this is true, and they support this because they seemingly love abortion. They don't love reproduction like they claim to do. They don't love health care. They love abortion, and it's a very sad thing that is occurring in the mainstream media and the government and just all around us, the academic institutions in this country, what they're teaching our kids and our young people as well. Cameron, I think we have time for one more comment if we have it. The engineer, our friend here, Harris responds to Helene, Hurricane Helene, yeah. Knock, knock, who's there? Kamala who? I'm sorry, we're not taking any questions at this time. That's exactly the case. Isn't it sad? When Donald Trump, when he was in office, he went down to, I think it was Puerto Rico, when they had a hurricane there. He responded, he brings down supplies, brings down money, and all the media can do was criticize his visit when he went down there, claiming that all he did was provide paper towels, which is a total lie, and it just makes me sick who these reporters have become. Kamala Harris doesn't bring anything. She goes down, and she's lauded. There's no pushback from the media on her response or Joe Biden's response to this. Donald Trump still with Helene, he went down to Georgia and he met with the victims and he promised supplies, especially if he gets office. But in the meantime, since he's not in office right now, what he has done is he's partnered with the private sector. He's got guys like Elon Musk now launching up Starlink and connecting it so people have internet in those areas. He's helping to raise millions of dollars with his millionaire buddies. He's got contacts, right? So he gets them involved specifically to raise money for the victims so they can have more than just $750, which Kamala Harris said says seems to be enough to give these victims when they've seen their house floating down the street. $750, and but she supports giving thousands, tens of thousands to people during COVID. There's something amiss here. So, engineer, always good to hear from you, and a great comment. Thanks so much. Thank you for watching today. Appreciate it as always. Remember, you can support us by subscribing to Tom Jordan Live on YouTube, on X, on Facebook, on Apple Podcast, and on Spotify. Wherever you get your podcast, you can find Tom Jordan Live. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it. God bless you. Have a good day.